We were the Dalton Gang. And like Jesse James, Billy the Kid, or Butch Cassidy, we were outlaws of the Wild West. Does Wild West ring a bell? You know, that era in US history so often romanticized in movies, that folks just can't get enough of. I lived through it. And what I can tell you is, times were so wild back then, breaking the law was almost par for the course. Plenty of outlaws rose up then, us Daltons included. So, for the next few minutes, I'll tell you our story. Fair warning, our experience wasn't exactly ordinary. You'll see why soon enough. For now, let's dive into the late 19th century American West and see what made our gang a Wild West legend. Let's kick things off by busting a myth. The Daltons weren't just brothers. Yep, we had sisters too. Our family was huge actually, 15 kids in total, 10 boys and 5 girls. Among us siblings were Frank, Robert, everyone called him Bob, Grattan or Grat, Emmett, that's me. William, who went by Bill, Ben, Cole, St. Louis, Littleton, Lelia, Eva, Leona, Nami, and the twins Adeline and Simon. Quite the crowd, in short. Our father, James Lewis Dalton, was the family patriarch. He was a Mexican War veteran and a farmer, a hard-working, modest, steady, and respectable man. And then there was our mother, Adeline Younger Dalton. Crazy as it sounds, Mom was actually the aunt of Cole, Bob, and Jim Younger. Those three were notorious Wild West bandits, their exploits right up there with ours and the James brothers. In 1880, our family packed up and moved from Cass County, Missouri, to Indian Territory. There, Dad took up ranching and farming. We kids, we got ourselves a top-notch education. Ben and Cole even graduated college. And Frank, our eldest, he was a firm believer in law and order. That's right, before we ever turned to crime, the Daltons actually served the law. Our older brother, Frank, was the first to wear a badge. If you don't mind, let's take a closer look at his life. Because, well, you could say our criminal past pretty much spun off from his story. In 1882, Frank Dalton was appointed U.S. Deputy Marshal. Back then, that job meant protecting federal judicial officials, judges, jurors, lawyers, you name it. But it also meant hauling prisoners, digging into criminal operations, and pulling off special assignments. To us, Frank was a hero. My younger brothers and I, we wanted to be just like him, no matter what. Truth be told, he had qualities most folks would kill for: brave, fearless, and honest to a fault. No doubt about it, if he'd stayed by our side, we never would have gone down the road of crime. But fate, it had other plans. Frank's death on November 27, 1887, inadvertently paved the way for Bob, Grat, and me to forge the legend of the Dalton Gang. Let me tell you briefly about his tragic end. It all started when Frank, along with another deputy marshal, set out after 3 whiskey smugglers who'd been thumbing their noses at the law. Their mission was clear: bring those bandits in. When Frank and his partner spotted the camp, they split up. Frank would circle around the tent where the outlaws were holed up, while his companion handled the woman outside. My brother Frank moved in, managing to get around to the back of the thug's tent. Suddenly, he came face to face with one of the thieves. That's when disaster struck. The robber, revolver in hand, fired at the same instant as my brother, and Frank went down. Frank, badly wounded, still managed to take the man down, but he was left on the ground defenseless. The rest is pure tragedy. In that vulnerable spot, Frank Dalton was brutally executed, shot 3 times by another outlaw. After his death, the Fort Smith, Arkansas, Marshal's Service invited Grat to take Frank's place. Before that, Grat had been working on Dad's farm, raising horses. But that life was just too quiet for him. He was itching for a more exciting life, so he jumped at the U.S. Marshal's offer to step into Frank's boots. Later, Bob joined him, assigned to assist. So now, 2 of the Dalton brothers were serving their country, committed to upholding the law with vigor. A good intention, but one that would soon lead us into deep trouble. We Daltons, we'd soon switch sides after a bitter disillusionment. After Frank's death, Grat became a U.S. deputy marshal. Bob, who'd been assisting him, soon earned his own badge as well. And to help him out, he called on me. My job was to guard the prisoners they brought in. Back then, deputy marshals were paid through a bounty system. Each deputy marshal received 10 cents a mile for carrying documents, 40 cents a day for watching a prisoner, $2.50 for reading an arrest warrant, and the same for an arrest itself. So that's how Grat, Bob, and I got paid. And by the way, that's exactly where all our troubles began. See, as fate would have it, Bob got played by his superiors. To avoid paying him what he was owed, they kept feeding him the same old line: the government hasn't transferred any funds yet. The money will arrive soon. Except soon never came. Bob, feeling completely ripped off, finally quit his job as deputy U.S. Marshal. He, who'd worked honestly for years to uphold the law, was now a victim of stolen wages, likely at the hands of a crooked administration. Right then, a deep sense of injustice took root in Bob. Disgusted, my older brother could only think of one thing: revenge. Out of a job, he later decided to head to New Mexico to start fresh. With him were me and two other fellas, George Newcomb and Charles Bryant, who were already outlaws. Together, we rode clear across Oklahoma to our destination. In New Mexico, we pulled into Santa Rosa. We grabbed dinner at a Chinese restaurant, then headed to the saloon next door for some fun. After finding a table, Bob, George Newcomb, Charles Bryant, and I started playing a rather shady Mexican card game. The game felt rigged, and I quickly pointed it out to my brother Bob. He just nodded and said, "All right, if you're sure, we'll teach those bastards a lesson." It was 10 o'clock that night, and nearly 50 armed men filled the saloon. But Bob wasn't fazed. He immediately told us to get into position, aiming at everyone in the room. When the signal came, we all drew our weapons, yelling, "Hands up." It was such a surprise that we cleaned out the cheats, without even firing a shot. Just a little earlier, I remember Bob telling them, "You folks don't know how to treat strangers right here, so we're gonna teach you a lesson." That was the Daltons' first crime. After that saloon incident in New Mexico, Bob, our two sidekicks, and I headed back to Oklahoma. Meanwhile, our brother Grat, still holding his U.S. Deputy Marshal position, was unfortunately suffering the same fate as Bob. The administration responsible for his bonuses was systematically withholding them. The result: Grat resigned, just like Bob had. He was the last of the Daltons to serve the law. After this bitter disillusionment, Grat moved to our brother Littleton's ranch out in Fresno, California. Bob and we were staying at our brother Bill's ranch, helping him with the cattle and doing odd jobs. It was February 1891 when everything changed. A dramatic event was about to alter our lives forever. It all began when a local rancher brought Bob and me some news. "Heard about that holdup? A Leela train. They blew the safe and killed the trainmen. Wells Fargo and Southern Pacific are offering a reward for the robbers. $5,000. Gotta go buy." When we heard about it, Bob and I were on our way to tend to the cattle. Since those kinds of things happened all the time back then, we didn't think much of it. Then I remember telling my brother, "Looks like someone hit the jackpot. Wonder who it was. Don't know and don't care, but I wish it was us." And wouldn't you know it? Later, we found out we were implicated in that very train robbery. The news, spreading like wildfire by word of mouth, pointed straight at the Daltons as the culprits. When we heard this, Bob and I were completely blindsided. The word came from a neighbor. Detectives were after us and heading straight for Bill's ranch. At that point, we knew it was all over. Why, you ask? Because back then, just being a suspect was practically the same as being guilty. So we hid in a dark room in the ranch house, and from there, we saw the detectives arrive. When they got there, they immediately grilled our brother Bill, desperate to know our whereabouts. Bill swore up and down we were innocent, but it didn't matter. The detectives were convinced it was some Dalton trick. Arrogant and almost comical, here's what they said: "I know it's them, and I'll get 'em." "Oh, I'll get 'em, all right." Their intention was clear. The Daltons had to be captured and jailed, whether we were guilty of the Alila train attack or not. Slowly, the writing on the wall became clear. That day, the Dalton Gang was truly born. After hearing the detectives' words, Bob and I decided right then and there to take off. Proclaiming our innocence would have been useless anyway. In their eyes, we were already guilty. So we saddled up and fled, heading for the mountains to shake off the law. Grat, unfortunately, wasn't so lucky. He was arrested at our brother Littleton's ranch in Fresno. A ranch that, for the record, was over 100 miles from where the Alila robbery took place. Back then, covering that kind of distance in such a short time was physically impossible. Luckily, with that solid alibi, he managed to prove his innocence, and he was released some time later. But it didn't last long. The detectives, still determined to put the Daltons behind bars, accused Grat once again. This time, it was for supposedly being seen with us. His bail was set at $20,000, so he was stuck in jail until his trial. So, 2 of the Dalton brothers were on the run, and another was locked up without a shred of evidence. While Grat languished in jail, Bob and I kept riding through the mountains of the U.S. West Coast. With no food, we were forced onto narrow trails through relentless snow and biting cold. When it wasn't mountains, it was deserts, plains, or valleys. We were forced to live on the fringes of the law, leading a fugitive's life. At that point, our bitterness just exploded. We wanted only one thing: revenge. We wanted revenge on the express company, the very company we believed was behind our unpaid wages and that false accusation for the Alila robbery. Joined by George Newcomb and Charles Bryant, we soon learned that the express company was transferring a large sum of money by train on the outskirts of Kansas City, Missouri. For us, it was finally a way to get even. With Bob and the other 2 desperados, we were ready to pull off our very first train robbery. A stick-up motivated by one thing and one thing only: our pure hatred for the express company. So, with prices on our heads, we carefully planned our train robbery, joined by our cronies. Here's how we planned it: Charles Bryant and I would prepare the horses, ensuring a quick getaway for the gang after the attack. Meanwhile, George Newcomb and Bob would head to Wurton and wait for the 10:30 train. When the locomotive pulled out, those 2 would jump aboard, overpower the driver and engineer, and force them to take the train to where Charles Bryant would be waiting. Then Bob and George would make the employees get off, uncouple the locomotive from the cars, collect as much money as they could, and make their escape using the horses we'd set up. And wouldn't you know it? It worked like a charm. Bob and George pulled off the heist without a hitch, and our gang rode away with $9,000. After that successful robbery, we were officially train robbers, outlaws for good. So, after the Wurton train raid, we'd gotten our revenge. We'd hit the express company for a big chunk of money, and at that moment, it felt like more than enough. The resentment we'd harbored against that company was slowly fading. At this point, Bob and I didn't feel the need to keep up the brigand life. Taking a step back, we realized a life of crime wasn't worth living. The inevitable consequences of that life had finally convinced us to change course. Bob then suggested we head down to South America, lay low. Down there, he figured, we could buy a ranch and raise livestock. Sounded good to me. So we set off for New Orleans, aiming to catch a boat and get out for good. Charles Bryant wasn't with us anymore. He'd been shot by a marshal in the interim. As for George Newcomb, he was still alive but had temporarily split from the gang. In New Orleans, Bob and I were just about to pay for our tickets and board the steamer that would take us to South America. It was the final step that would let us end our run and live out our days in peace. But once again, fate had other plans. Bob and I were reading the daily paper when we got some terrible news. Bandit Grat Dalton convicted. Grat Dalton, who'd been languishing in prison awaiting trial, had finally been convicted by the courts as an accomplice in the Alila train attack, the very robbery that had wrongly accused us. Hearing this grim news, Bob just looked at me and said, "Well, I guess we're going back. So much for South America. That's that." He added, "Besides, maybe it's too hot there anyway. What's for sure is, back here in the United States, things are about to get hotter than hell for some folks. Pack your bags, we're going home tonight. Looks like they don't want to let us have a fresh start." Grat's conviction meant our plan to leave for South America, to live as rich and respected ranchers, was dead in the water. The promise of a fresh start vanished, replaced by a renewed thirst for revenge. But against all odds, Grat Dalton had managed to escape the very night he arrived. Thanks to Bill, who helped him. Lost in the wild, Grat managed to evade the authorities and join us in April 1892. Sometime before that, Bob and I had already reformed the Dalton Gang, first by getting back in touch with George Newcomb, then by recruiting 4 more bandits: Charles Pierce, Bill Doolin, Dick Broadwell, and Bill Powers. Our goal at this point was to rebuild the gang, with Grat joining later, pull off enough robberies to save up enough money, and then once and for all head for South America. While waiting for Grat, our gang had already hit another train, the Lilietta. The process was the same as the Wurton attack. We'd wait for the train to stop at the station, then jump on, storm the locomotive, and grab the loot. This time, the haul was $9,400. And we weren't about to stop there. After the Lilietta raid, Grat finally joined the gang. When he arrived, Grat filled us in on his trial and escape. He, brimming with bitterness and resentment, immediately reignited the hatred we all felt for the crooked administration that had wronged us so deeply. The Dalton Gang was now complete, and that lineup wouldn't change again. At this point, we were still dead set on leaving for South America. Only problem was, we needed money. Without it, we couldn't skip town. So we kept robbing. Hitting the locomotives, we realized it just wasn't enough. If we were ever going to get out of the country, it was clear we had to change our strategy, even if it meant doing something irreversible. Something like Bob's crazy idea, robbing 2 banks at once. Bob had indeed proposed hitting the CM Condon Bank and the First National Bank in Coffeyville, Kansas, simultaneously. To me, it was clearly an act of desperation, but we had no choice. We figured it would be the last one before we headed south. So we all agreed to Bob's plan. Well, everyone except Bill Doolin, George Newcomb, and Charles Pierce, who'd had enough. To prepare for the raid, we got ourselves some fresh horses and stocked up on ammunition. Here's how we planned to pull off this insane heist. Once we got to Coffeyville, the gang would split into 2 groups. Grat Dalton, Bill Powers, and Dick Broadwell would handle the Condon Bank, while Bob and I would hit the First National Bank. Once inside the banks, we'd grab the money, get out together, and jump into the saddle to make our getaway. For the escape, we'd use a hitched wagon packed with ammunition and provisions, with 2 of us disguised as farmers in the front, and the others hidden inside. From there, Bob, Grat, and I would travel separately to South America on different boats. Dick Broadwell and Bill Powers, not interested in the South America plan, would go their own way. So that was the theory. Now it was time to put it into practice. Tuesday, October 4th, 1892, 8 o'clock in the evening, the day before the robbery. My companions and I were leaving our camp, located nearly 20 miles from Coffeyville. After a long ride, we stopped about a little over a mile southwest of town to rest. The next morning, we all got up early. Before leaving, we had a light meal and fed our horses.
8:45 Uhr morgens. Time to go.
We were ready to pull off the craziest heist in history.
Onward to Coffeyville. This is the last lap.
On October 5, 1892, a sunny Wednesday with an autumn wind, we started riding into Coffeyville. Bob and I led the way, with Grat, Bill, and Dick following close behind. When we got there, we tied our horses to a fence, then split into two groups, just as we'd planned. Grat, Bill, and Dick headed into the Condon Bank, while Bob and I crossed the street toward the First National Bank. We were just about to step inside when suddenly we heard, "Here come the Daltons."
Yeah, bad start.
We were already spotted. We had no choice. We had to launch the attack right then. Bob turned around and shot the whistleblower, who dropped dead. Meanwhile, across the street, Grat and his two accomplices launched their attack on the Condon Bank.
Hands up.
Then, open the safe. As he aimed his Winchester at the cashier. Across the street, Bob and I were just beginning our robbery at the First National Bank. While I held the crowd hostage, Bob worked on the teller, ordering him to fill the bags with cash.
Suddenly, a shot rang out from outside.
Someone was shooting at the front door of the bank we were in. We didn't think twice. We immediately went out the back door and ran. When we reached an alley, I was carrying the bags of money, $23,000 in total, and Bob was covering me. At this point, some of the Coffeyville residents started pulling out their guns and shooting back. Out in the open as we turned a corner, Bob and I came under fire. Fortunately for us, neither of us was hit. In fact, it was quite the opposite. By shooting back, Bob had already killed 2 people. I even remember him telling me, "If this doesn't calm down, I'm gonna shoot up the whole city. I've already killed 2.
Let's get back to the horses.
The others must be done by now." But when we got to the horses, the situation hadn't improved one bit. Suddenly, we heard a burst of gunfire from the east. Our comrades were in chaos too. After hearing the gunfire, Bob and I saddled our horses and rode to the rescue of the second group of robbers. Meanwhile, other townspeople had grabbed guns and were shooting at us. We then galloped at full speed, trying to defend ourselves. I remember Bob just firing his Winchester in every direction. When we got to the Condon Bank, Grat, Bill, and Dick were just coming out. Turns out, they'd been strung along by the bank teller, who'd kept them waiting for 3 long minutes. A delay that would prove fatal for us. Once we were all together, we tried to get to our horses, but it got real complicated. We were on the back foot, facing Coffeyville residents firing at us from behind doors and windows. The atmosphere in Coffeyville was apocalyptic. The noise was deafening, and bullets were flying everywhere. The situation became critical for us. At this moment, we were very close to our horses, our bags still full of loot. We were about to make our getaway. Then, suddenly, Bill Powers was shot in the arm. Then it was my turn. As I was unhitching my horse, a bullet shattered my right arm, and another hit me in the back. Soon the rest of the gang was falling. Grat and Bill were already dead, and Bob was seriously injured. The only one who'd managed to get away was Dick Broadwell. He'd made it out of the city on his horse. But his escape didn't last. Dick was so injured he couldn't go on. He fell from his horse and died.
Under a hail of bullets, I made my way to my brother Bob, the only one still alive.
Despite the deafening noise, I could hear his last words, "Farewell, Emmett.
Don't get caught. Die like a brave man."
I tried to save him, hoisting him onto my horse, but it was no use.
In my turn, I fell under the intense fire.
Still alive, I watched my brother draw his rifle one last time and fire. With a faint smile on his face, Bob said in a weak, husky voice, "I'm dying." After our terrible disaster in Coffeyville, I was the only one left standing. Miraculously, I made it out alive after being shot 23 times. My 4 accomplices, including 2 of my own brothers, lay dead on the battlefield. For 11 long minutes, Coffeyville had turned into a living hell. The average death rate per minute that day was higher than in any battle of the Civil War. During that horrific confrontation, 8 people were killed and 3 wounded. So on October 11, 1892, I was transferred to prison. On March 8, 1893, just 5 months later, I was found guilty of complicity to murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, even though I hadn't fired a single shot during the shootout. After 14 years behind bars, I was finally released. The state governor, where I was serving my sentence, had pardoned me. Once free, I traveled the country, giving talks about prison conditions. On July 13, 1937, at the age of 66, I passed away in Los Angeles. So that's how we Daltons lived. A story both tragic and spectacular. I hope our story has given you a better understanding of the lawlessness of our times. Laws as much scorned by the bandits as by those sworn to uphold them. If it weren't for the corruption that pushed us down the path of crime, we Daltons might have continued to uphold the law of our land. But alas, it was a different story. Perhaps fate intended us to loot trains and banks, to become legends of the Wild West.